Ush moi echo Rodi shavos
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Weiss. I am the Director of Communications for the Cantors Assembly, and I'm thrilled to welcome you here to tonight's program, Ukrainian Cantorial Superstars. There are so many of them that we couldn't fit them all into the program, so we wanted to start you off with some music. What you were just listening to was Pierre Pinchik, Rosa de Shabbos, which is absolutely one of the great classics. For those of you who don't know what Pinchik looks like, you'll see him again in a moment when we show our opening slide, but he was the stylish one with the hat and the fedora in the bottom row. So you'll see him again in a moment. But before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to our hosts for today, Alex Klein and David Prager. Every time they come and share their expertise with us and their experience, it's just absolutely fascinating. And I know that today is going to be no exception. I want to also thank the organizations that help sponsor this program, along with the Cantors Assembly, Jewish Music Institute, European Cantors Association, and the Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience. I want to thank all of them profusely. This is one of an entire series of programs that the Cantors Assembly is doing to not only raise awareness of the cantorial tradition that has arisen out of the Ukraine, but also to help, quite honestly, to motivate people to give to those who are trying to make a difference right now in this terrible conflict. So we will share more information about those opportunities to give and to take part later in the program. But right now, I want to turn this over to Alex, who will get us started.
Thank you, Mike, for those introductions. And it's a pleasure to be here and see so many people. listening, and this is going to be a very, very poignant program. But before we start and I introduce Sveta to you, for those who don't know that much about the Ukraine and Ukrainian Jews, at one time, a third of the Ukraine was Jewish in population. Yiddish was declared the third national language, and also that Yiddish was written on the banknotes. The people that have come out of the Ukraine, prominent people that we know and love in our history, besides the Hasidic Rebbes of Mezerich and Chabad, and Rab Nachman and the founders of the Hasidic movement, all came from the Ukraine. Today, our history is steeped with people like Chaim Nachman Bialik, who was born in the Ukraine, Leon Trotsky, Sholem Sekunda, Sholem Aleichem, the person who wrote the Tevye stories and Tevye the Milkman, and from Anitevka, and Isaac Stern, Premier Golda Meir, and unfortunately had a very checkered history because Babi Yar, which is well known for the pogroms and the murder of so many hundreds of thousands of Jewish people, and I know there's a monument for this today, but again, there are things where Jews had a lovely life and then again pogroms followed by a lovely life again. So it's like history repeating itself. And even though the largest Jewish center in Europe happens to be in the Ukraine, a 21-story building called the Menorah Center, which houses shopping arcades, hotels, mikveh, Jewish schools, synagogues, etc., etc. But I would like now to, after that introduction, to introduce Sveta Kundish, who is an ordained cantor who studied at the Geiger School, and she will tell us a little bit about her Ukrainian background, about the situation today, and will sing for us as well live from Germany. Welcome, Sveta, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alex. Thank you for this introduction. Thank you for the invitation. It's a huge honor for me to be with you today, to speak about Ukraine, to speak about Ukrainian amazing cantorial tradition, to be able to pray together, to sing, and so on. I was born in Ukraine in 1982. This is not a very joyful chapter of my family life. I was born in Chernobyl because my father served by the station back then in the 80s. And when I hear about Chernobyl and the occupation these days, it means a lot for my family. It's another heartbreak to find the name of Chernobyl in the news so often. My family goes back many generations, and my great-grandfather, Shimon Hershman, was a cantor in a small Ukrainian shtetl in Ovruch, not far from Zhytomyr. So I am from a family which is very connected to Jewish tradition, Jewish music, and Yiddish language, of course, as well. But at the same time, the first years of my life I spent in Ukraine before my family moved to Israel. So many people in Ukraine with whom I'm in touch today are my teachers, friends, neighbors, friends I went to school with, and also many friends and colleagues which I met in the last decades when I became professional singer and cantor, and through my work I met many unique, wonderful people from Ukraine. The last time I visited Ukraine was last December, just 3 months ago. And situation back then was already very worrying, but nobody could imagine what it will turn into, what we see in the news today. I was in Kyiv in December. On December 7th, we played on Theater on Podil, a show which is called Our Songs for Babin Yar, a theater performance. The premiere was first in London in November, and then the next time we played it was in Kyiv. We went to Babin Yar all together with our crew, and also we couldn't imagine that on this side bombs are going to fall just in a couple months later. So my heart is broken. It's hard for me to find words to describe with which thoughts and feelings and worries and disappointment and anger we read the news. Me and my family and my friends, we're trying to help as much as we can refugees here in Berlin and all over Germany. There are also many Jewish families who arrived from Ukraine recently, and we say special prayers in my shul, in my synagogue in Braunschweig, Brunswick, which is in Low Saxony. And Acheinu Kol Beis Yisrael, for example, was traditional prayer which never felt as relevant as these days, when a couple weeks ago Alexander Duchovny, the liberal rabbi from Ukraine, from Kyiv, was sitting in a shelter in a basement with his congregation and celebrating Shabbos over Zoom. And I couldn't connect because we had a service in my synagogue, but I know that many colleagues, many friends are connected, and were trying to support as much as they could these poor people sitting in a basement and celebrating Shabbat despite everything. So if I may, I would like to recite and say two prayers with you tonight. The first one will be not just for our Jewish people, brothers and sisters who are in troubles and in danger, but also for all the people in the world, in Ukraine, and then also in other parts of the world where the war is going on, where people are injured, killed, where people's homes are being destroyed, where people feel fear and loneliness. Let me recite the prayer, first in Hebrew, then in English, and also in Ukrainian as a sign of solidarity with people in Ukraine. יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו, שתבטל מלחמות ושפיכות דמים מן העולם, ותמשיך שלום גדול ונפלא בעולם, ולא יישאו גוי אל גוי חרף, ולא ילמדו עוד מלחמה, רק יכירו וידעו כל יושבי תבל, האמת לאמיתו, אשר לא באנו לעולם הזה בשביל ריב ומחלוקת, חס ושלום, ולא בשביל שנאה וקנאה וקנטור ושפיכות דמים, חס ושלום, רק באנו לעולם כדי להכיר ולדעת אותך, תתברך לנצח, ויקוים מקרא שכתוב, ונתתי שלום בארץ, ושכבתם ואין מחריד, וישבתי חיה רעה מן הארץ, וחרב לא תעבור בארצכם. Let me recite the translation in English. May it be your will, eternal, our God and God of our ancestors, that you remove wars and bloodshed and bring great, wonderful peace to the world. May no nation lift up sword against nation, nor learn war anymore. Only may all the inhabitants of the earth see the truth and know that we didn't come into this world for the sake of quarrels and crucify. God forbid. and not for fight, hatred, envy, hostility, and bloodshed. God forbid. But we came into the world only to find and know you, the blessed one, forever. May the verse be fulfilled, and I bring peace over the earth, so that you may lie down to sleep, and no one will disturb you, and drive wild beasts out of the land, and no sword shall go through your land. I would like to recite this prayer now in Ukrainian, thinking of all my dear friends there. Нехай буде воля Твоя, Господь, Бог наш і Бог батьків наших, щоб усунув Ти війни і кровопролиття зі світу, і приведи на цей світ великий і чудовий мир, і не підніме більше народ на народ меча, і не будуть більше вчитися воювати, а тільки зрозуміють і впізнають всі, хто населяє землю, істинну правду, що прийшли ми в цей світ не заради сварок і розприй. Не дай Бог, і не заради ненависті, заздрості, неприязні та кровопролиття, не дай Бог, а прийшли ми у світ тільки для того, щоб знайти і пізнати Тебе, благословенного навіки. І нехай виповниться те, що написано, і оселю мир Україні. І коли ляжете, то не буду турбувати вас, і зведу лютих звірів із країни, і меч не пройде країною вашою. I would like to pray and sing Acheinu kol beis Yisroel. Yosel Rosenblatt, one of the greatest Jewish cantors of all times. I know you will talk about him in this program tonight, and it's my big honor and pleasure to pray and sing Acheinu kol beis Yisroel for his melody. As for our brothers and sisters, the whole house of Israel, who are given over to trouble or captivity, whether they abide on the sea or on the dry land, may the All-Present have mercy upon them, and bring them forth from trouble to enlargement, from darkness to light, and from subjection to redemption, now, speedily, and at a near time. Acheinu kol beis Yisroel, Acheinu kol beis Yisroel, Acheinu kol beis Yisroel, Acheinu kol beis Yisroel, anesunim batzuru uveshivyu. Acheinu kol beis Yisroel, kol beis Yisroel, Yisroel, anesunim batzuru uveshivyu. Yisroel, anesunim batzuru uveshivyu. Ha'omedim beinim bayashu, ben hayom uven bayabushu. המקום ירחם עליהם אחינו כל בית ישראל. המקום ירחם עליהם אחינו כל בית ישראל. המקום ירחם עליהם. המקום ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרו לרווחה ויפילו ליורו ומשיבוד ליגוילו. ובזמן קריב השתבגלה ובזמן קריב Thank you so much for this invitation, for your help, for telling the world about Ukraine and those treasures which came out of this land. I am so grateful to you. It gives me hope for the future to see how people are trying to help in every way. Thank you so much, and let's all pray for peace to come soon.
I think we should take a minute to reflective silence so our prayers and our thoughts will reach the gates of heaven with Sveta's wonderful prayers to open the gates so the Eibishter, so God himself, will answer our prayers and that peace should reign throughout the world as we know it for no more. Amen.
Amen.
Minute to reflect, please. Thank you. I would now like to invite David Prager to make this wonderful presentation of some of the greatest singers of our people the world has ever known. David, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mike, please could we share the first slide? So you see on your screen now the front slide of the Cantors Assembly, which Mike referred to a few minutes ago. And we're going to be playing some of the music of these tremendous musicians. Just to explain the photos that the Cantors Assembly had coincidentally chosen for its logo for this series. Top right-hand corner, you see Gershon Sirota, who we're not playing tonight, but we have devoted a separate program to in the past. Next to him, you see Mordechai Hershman, who we are playing tonight. With the top hat, you see with the round glasses, Yossele Rosenblatt. On the left-hand side, you see Chazanut Alter, who we are going to be playing tonight. Bottom left, you see Chazan Ganchoff, who we're not playing tonight. Then with a smart hat, who you heard as we were being played in, Pierre Pinchik. Then there is a picture there of a gentleman who is not from the Ukraine, therefore we're not playing him tonight. That is Moshe Kusevitsky, who was from Lithuania. And bottom right, we are playing David Reutemann. So with no further ado, let's go to the second slide, please, Mike. Thank you. So here's a map of the Ukraine to explain where Yossele Rosenblatt comes from. More or less bang in the middle of today's Ukraine. Sveta, you will forgive my Ukrainian pronunciation, but I think today, nowadays, it's called Bila Cherkva. Most of the literature says Biela Cherkov in Russian, which means white church. In Yiddish, they didn't like the title white church for the town, so they called it Schwarze Tummer, which means black abomination. And Yossele Rosenblatt was born there in 1882. He was the son of a chazan, and the family had 9 girls, first of all, before young Yossele was born. And you'll be interested to know that after him, there was a second boy also born, Levi Yitzchok, who tragically died in the Holocaust. Now, we heard from Sveta that her grandfather was a Hershman, and people believe that there are genetic links to voices. So Yossele Rosenblatt is related to 2 famous chazonim of the earlier generation, Nissi Belzer and Yerucham HaKotan. So maybe he got his vocal skills and musical skills through the lines of at least one of them. The family was expelled from Russia in 1889 when Yossele was 7. And he wrote in his son wrote in the biography of his father that one of the sisters was maimed by guards at the border, and she never recovered from that injury. So he escaped into the Austro-Hungarian Empire and spent his youth in the court of the Hasidic Rebbe at Sadigura, and he spent some time studying music in Vienna before he married at the age of 18 and obtained his first cantorial post in Munkac. He then, shortly after that, moved on to Pressburg, which is today's Bratislava, and then he entered the Western world by becoming the chazan in Hamburg, which he left in 1912 after about 5 years, and he then became globally famous from 1912 onwards in New York. And he made some records in Europe, and he made more records in America. Mike, can we have the next slide on Yossele Rosenblatt? There are very, very few photos of Yossele in his cantorial garb, but here is one of them. And on the bottom right-hand side, you see a picture of the great synagogue of Hamburg. which was destroyed on Kristallnacht. Those of you who have seen manuscripts written by the young Chassid, Yosler Rosenblatt, will be amazed at his natural musicianship. And he became not only a natural musician, but an academic musician, and was able to compose choral works of incredible complexity. Not only was he a great musician, but he was blessed with a voice of exquisite beauty. In terms of his personality, he was generous to a fault, and in fact was misled into investing in what became a bankrupt publication, which pressurized him financially extremely towards the end of his life. And he agreed in 1933 to go on a tour of Israel to make a film, and he sang at a few services and concerts in Israel, but suddenly died of a heart attack at the age of 51. And he's buried on the Mount of Olives. Can we have the next slide, please? Sorry, we should let him play as this. I was just going to show you, there's me at his grave a few years ago. Alex will tell you that's the most well-traveled cap in the world that I'm wearing there. And you can see that there are a lot of stones on his grave. It's very, very well visited. Okay, let's move back to one of his most heaven-piercing compositions at the top of the previous slide, V'hu from the evening service. Thank you, Mike. Can we move on to the next slide now? Thank you. Next one after that, because we're going to go into the spring now and hope, and the most emotional piece of Chazanut arguably ever written. I'm grateful to the great Chazan who was in Manchester during my childhood, Philip Copperman, whose daughter Jeanette I noticed on the list of attendees tonight, who said to me that the Irkasuka Neseres phrase from Rosenblatt's Tal is the most emotional piece of Chazanut Haregesh ever written. So we're going to hear that phrase now from the 1923 recording of Tal. The piece you just heard, V'hurachum, was recorded in 1928. And Rosenblatt, with his terrific voice, he turned down opportunities in opera. And he was invited for the first talkie film, The Jazz Singer, to lend his voice to that as well. So here, you're going to cry now when you hear, with the hope of spring and Tal and the prayer for dew coming soon at Pesach, Rosenblatt's interpretation of Irkasuka Neseres. It's like Mariupol and like the destroyed Irkasuka Neseres. Well, it's poetic, complex to understand language. But what does it mean? It means a city which remains just like a shack now. And please God, cover it with dew and, in other words, rebuild it and beautify it. So here's Irkasuka Neseres from Josla Rosenblatt. Amazing. With violin.
Good night,
much. And Mike, can we have the next slide now? We're moving on to Chazan Mordechai Hershman, maybe Mishpacha of Sveta, with the same general area of the Ukraine where the families came from. Mordechai Hershman was the second of the big three of the Golden Age. The big three were Rosenblatt, Hershman, and Kvartin, and we're going to hear from all of them tonight. But Hershman had the most beautiful, well-placed tenor voice. You get a lot of wrong information about Hershman: when he was born, where he was born, when he died. But the correct information, according to naturalization documents, both for him and for his brother, Solomon Hershman, who was in Manchester as a famous chazan also, the two boys were terrific vocalists. Anyway, we're going to hear Mordechai, but he's born correctly in Cherniachiv, which is not so far from Kiev. He was the son of a glass merchant. He was orphaned of his father early on in childhood. The youth of Mordechai was spent in poverty as an itinerant choir boy. Then he was conscripted into the Tsarist army. He was able to escape the harshest times in the army by being allowed out to conduct services at the weekends. And his first big post was in Zhytomyr. Then he became the Stadtchazan of Vilna in Lithuania. And just before 1920, he sailed for New York with the great choir master Leo Lowe. And you can see the arrival in Ellis Island online if you look up the shipping documents from that era. So let us move on to the next slide. Here's a picture that I'm grateful in a way to a number of accidents of history. Alex is a terrific networker, and in Manchester, he was in touch with the step-grandchild of the Hershman family, and he put me in touch with Solomon Hershman's son, who lives in Australia. And when I visited Australia, I went to visit the family, and they gave me this photograph. This is the Vilna Jewish Cemetery, and it's the grave of Mrs. Hershman, Taube Hershman, and it's from the 1920s. And between those two pillars at the bottom, you can just about read that the proud mum is saying that she is the mother of the Stadtchazan of Vilna, and Solomon at that time, before he was in Manchester, was the cantor of the Nozick synagogue, the terrifically famous synagogue, the one that survived the war in Warsaw. And on the right-hand side, you see where Mordechai eventually found global fame when he was in New York, and that is Beth El of Borough Park, one of the most famous cantorial synagogues in the world. So we're now going to hear also a prayer of hope, spring and Pesach, from Mordechai Hershman in Hershman's Tal, which is beautiful. Here are some more pictures of the family. The one on the right I got also in Australia with the two brothers, and you can see it's dated 1919, and that's when the brothers were parting because Mordechai was going to New York. Solomon didn't leave Warsaw until 1930. And in 1930, the two brothers, after 11 years separation, were reunited in Manchester. And I'm very grateful to Cantor Yehuda Marks, who has this terrific picture of the two boys back together again in England in 1930, with the senior cantor of Manchester, of the great synagogue in those days, Harris Newman, on the right, and Leo Lowe, who was his accompanist as well as choir master on his tours of Europe. And there you go, the two boys back together again after 11 years. Here on the left is a map showing you where the village of Chernihiv is compared with Kiev, and it's not to be confused with Chernihiv, where many people seem to mistakenly say that they come from. Let us move on to the recording of Tal on the next slide now. Oh, sorry, I've got to explain before we play the music that he worked with composers Lowe, Cousin Rappaport, and Arla Bloom. He was in Jerusalem for Rosenblatt's funeral, and he also died young, this time at 52 in 1941, and he's buried in New York, and he left us a legacy of many recordings of Chazanut and terrific Yiddish song interpretations as well. So sorry, now, Mike, the next one has indeed got Tal on it. So there's a picture of the label and picture of the man, and Tal, 1927. Mordechai Hershman. terrific. And for those of you who haven't got a tuning fork here, that last note was a top, penultimate note was a top D. So top C is not good enough for Mordechai Hershman, but depending on the real speed of the recording, maybe it was only a C sharp, but anyway, terrific, very, very emotional. We're moving on now to a different part of the Ukraine. No, we're not doing him again. Right, we're going to Joseph Schmidt, the famous opera singer, who was born near Charnovitz, or Charnovitzy, as you have to call it nowadays, I think, and Davidivka. In fact, my maternal grandmother was from that part of the world as well, and so maybe she went to the same synagogue that he became the cantor in. In the days that he was born and that my grandmother was born, it belonged to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, being in the province of Bukovina. And young Joseph Schmidt developed his cantorial knowledge by singing in the choir in the Chernovitz synagogue. Let's move on to the next slide. He was short in stature and couldn't make a career as an opera singer because of his small stature on the stage. But he was very, very successful as a chamber singer and had an international career and terrific recording career with operatic pieces. And sadly for us, very, very few cantorial pieces. He had the most perfect vocal technique, phenomenal range, and genuinely fluid coloratura. And you're going to hear now one of his rare examples of his Chazanut, singing from Brich Shemay on Avdo de Kudsho. So if we move on to the next slide, we should find it. Thank you very much. And tragically, you'll see from the gravestone on the left-hand side of his untimely death in a Swiss internment camp, because he was unable to escape captivity during the Second World War. He would have had the chance to maybe get to America earlier on, but alas, too late. He got into Switzerland as an alien, and was arrested, and was interned in a aliens internment camp, and he became ill from the harsh conditions there, and sadly died in 1942 and is buried in Switzerland. I saw somebody raise their hand over there before. If they want to speak, was that Barbara? Did you want to say something about Joseph Schmidt? If so, now's your chance. Or maybe at the end when we talk. Otherwise, let's move on to Zavel Kwartin. Now, he is one of my favorites. And I even polished up my Yiddish enough to read his 600-page Yiddish autobiography, Mein Leben, in order to try to grasp more of his genius. So he was also born in the central Ukraine. He was born in 1876. Let's move on to the next slide to tell his story a little bit. So his father had a textile business and didn't really want him to be a chazan. He was in a small shtetl in Chonorod. There wasn't a proper chazan choir, so he was one of the few famous chazanim who was not a choir boy. But he claimed himself to be a tenor, but most people would say he was a high baritone. But his early recordings, Kol Nidre, for instance, are recorded in Vienna in his early career. Depending on what the speed of the record was, it's either a top B, or maybe it's a C, or maybe it's only a B flat. But anyway, phenomenal for a man of his depth of voice, comfortable, really well into the tenor range. And in Vienna, his music teacher wanted to get him a job in the opera, singing both tenor and baritone roles. They thought they could get two for the price of one. But his real power was in emotional disaggregation and reaggregation of a paragraph to interpret it, so that if the listener really had no idea what the text was saying, he could explain it musically to the listener. He also was a great Zionist, and he also was in Jerusalem in 1933 at the time of Rosenblatt's death, and he also sang at Rosenblatt's funeral. I mentioned there the comprehensive autobiography, Mein Leben, which Jeremiah Lockwood is doing a valiant job of getting translated and putting online. So if anybody wants to read it, they just have to refer to the internet, and they will be able to see the amazing story of Zavel Kwartin's difficult early life. And then at the age of 21, following his marriage, he was able to pursue his dream to become a cantor, and the rest is history. He became one of the leading cantors. Can we move on to the next slide? You've got a picture of Temple Emmanuel of Borough Park, where he got to in America eventually. But in 1927, he recorded, and we were trying to pick the most emotionally gripping pieces that anybody had ever composed in their career. And for Kwartin, in my opinion, it could well be Hanashom Aloch from Srichas, which he recorded in 1927. Here's a picture of the label. And so, Mike, let's take it away with Hanashom Aloch. And you need to get your handkerchiefs out in case you cry now. much. Now let's move on to David Reutemann. So there you see him with his long beard, which eventually in the later photos in the USA disappeared. But he also came from not far away from Kvartin and Rosenblatt. And his first job was in the next door shtetl to his own in Lidvinka. He came from Josefpol. And he had a terribly difficult childhood, also in poverty. He maimed his hand in order to not have to do shooting in the Tsarist army. And he was fortunate in that his officer liked him and he was able to survive that okay. He was always worried about the size of his voice, that it wasn't large enough for him to pursue a cantorial career in the biggest synagogues. But his beautiful focus enabled him to hold down some of the biggest cantorial positions in Russia. And he did eventually become the Chazan of St. Petersburg. And after the revolution, his job disappeared and he escaped down to Odessa and then to Bucharest. And if one looks at the shipping documents, it says that he came from Paris to America. Most people say 1921, but the shipping documents say 1922. And this record that he made in America in 1927 of Ha'arevna is one of his most beautiful compositions. We're not going to hear the whole lot now in the interests of saving time, but the most interesting nigun part of the bracha about teaching Torah to the people of Israel is what we're going to hear now. So at the top of this slide, we've got this little clip Reutemann with his beautiful voice and wonderful Hasidic ideas of prayer with Hamlamed Torah. So let's hear it. Fantastic. So it's just a quick glimpse of Reutemann before we move on to Label a Glance. And we're very honored tonight in England, or this afternoon in America, or late tonight in Israel, to have present with us Dr. Jerry Glantz, the son of Leah Glantz, who, if he would like to say anything later on, we would really love to hear from. But for us now to tell you his life story, it's encapsulated on these following slides. He was born in Kiev in 1898. His father was a chazan. You can see pictures of the Talmud Shul if you look online. He was a terrific music student, studied with the top professors in Kiev Conservatoire. Unusual for the chazonim who became famous later on in Israel. He was a left-wing Zionist. He was an outstandingly creative composer, blessed with a beautiful tenor voice. He was a superb grammarian and Hebraist. Can we have the next slide? He moved to the USA in 1926. All right, go. Let's have the one where he's moving to the USA in 1926. And he had posts in New York and Los Angeles. Finally moved to Israel in 1954. He attracted a very strong following there. I think Benny Meissner is online. He can also tell us later on at the end about the very strong following that Label Glantz had in Israel. And sadly, he passed away young in 1958. Let's go to his recording of Tal, because that's a different take on hope for the future and the spring. Terrific. Thank you very much. And Jerry, if you would like to say a few your words, you're welcome. Or if you'd like to come on later, you're also welcome.
I'll be happy to.
Very good.
First of all, I'd like to mention that he didn't pass away in 1958, but in 1964 in Tel Aviv. I wanted to say that the former cantors that you played were amazing, and their music was beautiful and their voices were beautiful, but you can see a difference in the Chazanut of Leib Glantz compared to all of those. And the difference was that, number one, he believed that the time for renewal of Chazanut, which should coincide with the rebirth of the state of Israel and moving away from the galut and from the misery of the galut. And the second thing was my father had an amazing musical education in the conservatory in Kiev. And he was studying to be a concert violinist and composer of classical music. And you can see it in the way he composed his music. By the way, he composed 264 different compositions.
Fantastic.
I'd like to say about Tal, my father passed away when I was still a teenager, but I do remember the synagogue, the Tiferet Tzvi synagogue in Tel Aviv, when he sang Tal. This was a synagogue of about 1,000 seats. Half of them was in the Ezrat Nashim, where the women sat, and it was obviously an Orthodox synagogue. And there were probably, and I'm not exaggerating, 2,000 people inside the synagogue and another 2,000 people outside the synagogue listening. It was an amazing experience, and the people who were davening were mesmerized. And I remember as a young man, the excitement in the synagogue. It was just an amazing experience. So that's what I have to say. And I'd like
Thank you very much.
I'd like to say one more thing, if I may.
Yeah, go on.
We have, Cantor Joseph Ness and I have developed taken the music of Leib Glantz and created a thing called the Night Holocaust Concert, which has already been performed in Russia, Germany, Lithuania, soon to be performed in Riga, and on January 28th, 2023, it will be performed at the Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton. And what it does is it combines the music of Leib Glantz with the words of Elie Wiesel and his famous memoir, Night. And you can see this on YouTube. It's really an unbelievable experience. So enjoy. Yeah,
Alex and I had the opportunity to be there with you in Hamburg at the last one. Fantastic.
Hanover.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much.
Can I just say, and David, I'm just sorry to interrupt you, but the other classic was the Midnight Slichus, which was recorded by Israel Radio, and a live recording on an LP, which was the first of its kind ever to happen in Israel, which was phenomenal. So the RCA, I think it was, recorded it, and it was coincided live on radio, Israel Radio, and you could not get a seat. Do you remember that, Jerry?
Oh, sure. That was so amazing.
Could you just say a little bit about it, please?
Well, again, there were thousands of people surrounding the synagogue. There were policemen on horses pushing people away from trying to break in. It was just the the major thing that was happening in Israel at the time. And whoever was there came out with an experience that was never to be forgotten.
Fantastic. And all the choirs of the world have picked up the introduction to Slichas. For the humming and the beginning of Slichas, you could now scarcely attend a Slichas service which hasn't got Glantz's music in it. Amazing.
Well, I'll tell you one more thing. It took a while, but now almost every cantor in the world is singing Leib Glantz's music, and they're finding that it is very how shall I say,
that it speaks to them. Yeah.
It's a little different from the crying and sobbing that we're used to and that we love, because it, as you said, it moves us to tears. But that is not the real essence of Chazanut anymore. Today, Chazanut should be about the beauty of God, the beauty of the service, the importance of praying. And I think many cantors today in the world are picking this up and going ahead with Lance's music.
Thank you very much. So Mike, can we move on to the next superstar? Samuel Malavsky, very popular in Israel, very popular in America. Another Ukrainian, born in Smila in 1894. He got to America age 20. Rosenblatt picked him up, and he had posts across America. He founded his mixed choir in 1945, and he lived a long life. He died in 1985, and he was a beautiful chazan. So let's just move on to the next slide and play Vashomri in 1933. What a phenomenal track. And now to our last Ukrainian Cantorial Superstar, Israel Alter. And he was born in 1901. Then it was Lemberg, subsequently became Lvov, now Lviv. And he was a Chassid. He studied at home and also in Vienna. And he had posts in Vienna, Hanover, Johannesburg, and he taught chazonus in New York. Brilliant vocalist. You're going to hear him now in his 20s. I'm grateful to his nephew, Benjamin Meissner, for bringing my attention to this Shema Yisrael, which is on the next slide. He died in 1979. That's his synagogue in Hamburg, destroyed by the Nazis. In Hanover, sorry. Thank you. Now the last slide.
David, that was absolutely brilliant and very, very fascinating. And there's other stories. What is phenomenal about these great cantors is that they recorded for national, international record companies, non-Jewish record companies, who sought their voices and sought their recordings and bent over backwards to make sure that these recordings went around the world. It's a phenomenon that we don't see today with Jewish artists, or very, very few Jewish artists. The other thing, David, you brought to my attention later on this afternoon, this story that we were talking about, how Yossele Rosenblatt first heard Shmuel Malofsky in the chicken shop in America. Would you like to mention that to us?
As a young man in Smila, he'd gone to yeshiva and he became a shochet. And so when he came to America, age 20, his first job was as a shochet, and he was plucking chickens in the back of the butcher's shop. And Yossele Rosenblatt came in. Here's this man singing in the back of the shop, and promptly adopted him. So there you go.
And he also made the shidduch between Shmuel Malofsky and his wife. So the shotgun was Yossele Rosenblatt.
Made him a Ben Bias, is sort of he lets him live with his family. So I think maybe we can open it up to everybody. I know it's taken an hour and a half, not an hour.
Would you like to say a few words, Mike?
Allow us to keep the shul open, then everybody can chat.
Yes.
To you, Mike.
I would love to jump in for just a minute. And first of all, I want to thank you so much, David and Alex. I knew this was going to be fascinating, and just to be, not to put too blunt a point on it, I've as a cantor myself, I have heard all of their biographies before over the years, but it just never dawned on me how many of them came from the Ukraine. And when we were talking about creating this program, it just struck me that how critical, how crucial a part of our musical history the Ukrainian tradition is, and we would be remiss if we didn't do something to highlight that. I mean, we've done lots of programs over the years about these various cantors individually, but I think it's really something that we were able to do this today, and I really want to thank you for that, and thank you for introducing all of us to Sveta. She's yet another Ukrainian Cantorial Superstar, and whether we're talking about the golden age or the modern age, there are Ukrainian Cantorial Superstars, and we are blessed by them. And so thank you for creating a wonderful program. I want to also thank Jewish Music Institute, Lowell Milken Center for Music of American Jewish Experience, and the European Cantors Association for joining with the Cantors Assembly to bring this program to you today. I want to share a few announcements about some programs that we have coming up in the next week or two. We have this coming Wednesday our monthly song swap program hosted by Chazanim Jeremy Stein and Wendy Freed. They're going to be welcoming Rabbi Josh Warshawski, who is himself quite the superstar in the American Jewish music scene, and a little bit different style than what we've heard today, but always worth hearing. So hopefully you'll join us for that on this coming Wednesday. That's at noon Eastern. Whoops, missed something. Benny Meissner, who is here today with us, and hopefully will share a little bit about his uncle before we call it quits today, is also going to be sharing with us next week the second part of his two-part Preparing for Pesach series. This is the next one is going to be on Tal and Geshem. That's going to be at 2 o'clock Eastern, also next week, immediately followed by what I know is going to be a fascinating and uniquely entertaining program that we're calling the Virtual Cultural Seder. It's a Cantors Assembly production in association with the Yiddish Artists and Friends Actors Club. This is something that the Yiddish Artists and Friends Actors Club does every year, and this is the first time they've done it virtually. So we're very excited about it. It is basically a Seder in Yiddish and English, with featuring some tremendous voices, both from the Yiddish theater as well as from the Cantors Assembly. And that's going to follow immediately after Benny Meissner's session next Sunday. So please join us for both of those. And finally, we have on Sunday, May 1st, I think some of the items on this slide might have shifted a bit, but on Sunday, May 1st, the Cantors Assembly is creating a very special program to support the work of Masorti Olami and Midrashot Shechter and the work that they're doing in Ukraine. So far, they've gotten 100 people out, over 100 people, and many others to safety in Masorti communities throughout Europe, and they are working night and day to help provide relief to more people and also to provide for rebuilding. And we are this is going to be something of a telethon, but it's going to have music. We're going to meet refugees and the people who are helping them and find out how they are working with them to help rebuild. And that's going to be sad to say, a decades-long effort, and we are going to do everything that we can to support them. So that is all for the announcement, and I have opened up the chat already. But
to unmute himself, Benny Meissner, can you unmute yourself and tell us about your great uncle, or your great uncle literally, and uncle?
I'm really only a private citizen today, but I just want to share one note. I witnessed that first slichot with Jerry, because we live 2 houses from each other, and I remember very well discussions between the soulmates of Glanz and Israel Alter, of whom I was privileged to continue their vision in the cantorial world, and I studied with both of them, and there was nobody else bigger than Glanz himself. About Alter, it's a different story. I still maintain that Glanz was the one and only. I'm not saying only because Jerry is here. He was really unique, and only as far as my lesson next week, it is more of a teaching lesson with a lot of musical examples that I will demonstrate the Nusach. And when it comes to Glanz, his theory, not only that he was a great cantor, but why he was different and in what way he was different. So it is a teaching session, not so much a listening.
Benny, there was a question in the chat. What year did Israel Alter record Shema Yisrael? And I think you said he was in his 20s. I think it's like 26, 25, something like that.
An anecdote to it, I was in an elevator in 68th Street in New York, in the Hebrew Union College, where Eric Werner, the great musicologist, asked Israel Alter in a German accent, Herr Oberkantor, how old were you when you were singing Sesulza? And he said 24. Can you believe that voice at 24?
Amazing.
And you also
got the answer to the question.
Benny, it's also, Mike, well aware of this, in the HUC and the Jewish Theological Seminary, Alter's recordings and Alter's nusach and music are the staple diet. You cannot have sessions to do with the control and the understanding of nusach tefillah without using the works of Israel Alter and also Kachko. So those are the staple diets that we still use today in the seminars to teach our cantors.
I want to draw attention to a couple of questions in the chat. One is, was this session recorded? And yes, it was. We always record our sessions for precisely the reason that people usually want to revisit them over and over again, and we will have this available at some point in the very near future. So thank you for asking that question. There was another question for Jerry. I don't know, maybe Alex, you might know the answer for this. What is the date of the night concert in Boca?
I think it's the 23rd of January. I think that rings a bell, but I know it's January. It will be advertised, and we will well and truly advertise it with the Cantors Assembly, European Cantors Association, and various other Facebook pages. So you'll get good warning of when it is available and when it will take place.
Great. David Zarno, you've had your hand up for a while, and then we'll go to Lois Smith next.
Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed this program. I was very moved by Cantor Kundish and her blessing and her literal supplication. It was great to understand from her that Rabbi Alexander Duchovny is well. We hosted him in our home when he was here in the United States on tour. And our son was in the Peace Corps in Ukraine many years ago, stationed in Donetsk. We celebrated Sukkot in Odessa. To hear the sounds of the cantoriate in the synagogue in Odessa was magnificent. And I thank you for this lovely program. One very important question to me personally. You mentioned the jazz singer and that Rosenblatt was asked to be in the jazz singer. Could you clarify that for me?
Yeah, well, you can see the side takes of him singing in there. I don't think he was prepared to appear in the final film itself, but there are now, I think, even on YouTube, the recordings of Yortzeit Licht and the Kaddish.
Can I clarify that, David? He did appear in the jazz singer singing Yortzeit Lied because he didn't want to sing anything liturgical, even though they paid him a fortune, because they wanted him to sing Kol Nidre. But because of religious beliefs, Yossele declined that. He was offered phenomenal money to do so. So he said, I will sing something which is not liturgical. And he sang a Yiddish piece and another Yiddish piece, and then there was outtakes which were found on the shelf at Walnut, and they are available, and they were recorded, and they are on YouTube. So if you want to go onto YouTube, you can actually see those recordings, the outtakes from the jazz singer. You can also see the funeral of Yossele Rosenblatt and the recordings that he made in 1933 in Palestine, which are also on DVD, which you can acquire. I think it's Cantors in the Cinema, which is available to buy, and also you can watch it on YouTube. And the quality is absolutely superb.
Well, I want to actually.
The reason I brought it up is because
I want to jump in on that because, in fact, Alex, they're not outtakes. They were his screen tests, and those were found and restored by Cantor Murray Simon, who showed those for us just a couple of weeks ago, and they're available on this 2D DVD set that he shared over the course of 3 weeks. It's Great Cantors of the Golden Age and Great Cantors in Cinema. It's a beautifully done set of films that's available from the National Center for Jewish Film. Please contact them. I'll put the website in the chat. It's well worth. It's
really terrific. You can see singing.
Mike, according to the International Al Jolson Society, they were outtakes. According to Murray, they were not. So
okay.
Well, the reason I brought it up is because the actor who played Jolson's father, the cantor in the movie, could not sing, and it was my cousin Ray Carnet who did the voice, who was an opera singer and a cantorial soloist.
Fantastic, thank you. So, and Lois, we had a question from you.
Lois appears to have left. So if anybody else has something to please feel free to raise your hand. If you don't know how to do it, there's a hand raising function under the reactions section at the bottom of your screen. Marcia. Marcia.
Okay, thank you everyone who contributed to this program. It was just marvelous. Of course, as a musicologist as well as a cantor, I'm I am curious about whether there is sort of as a collection, the musical renditions of Leib Glantz in any library or archive, because I think it warrants some serious study in terms of his particular approach to all kinds of improvisation. And it's just fascinating, but I don't know if there's a repository somewhere or somewheres. So Dr. Glantz, is there something that you could share with us about that?
Well, at Florida Atlantic University, there's a lot of material about Leib Glantz in the library there. I'm sure in Jerusalem at the National Library with Guy Laflamme, there is a ton of material about Leib Glantz. But if you would like to contact me directly, I'll try and direct you to some specific work on that.
Okay, that would be great. Can you post, or should I post my email or what have you?
I'll put it on the message there. Here.
Okay, thank you, because I actually live in Boca Raton where FAU is located. So I know about their vast repository of cantorial recordings, but I'm curious about the music manuscripts themselves, because of course, a lot of these records that we heard were not a cappella, so either they were made in a recording studio or, a live concert performance. I don't know what the recording conditions were, but it's curious to me because there was all that imitation going on that was pretty complicated, and I don't think it would have just been something that an organist would have been able to imitate exactly the way his motifs were articulated. So I'd be curious about that, and I guess I'll find out when we talk further.
Yeah, let's get together.
Yeah, great.
Okay, Martin Kagan, I think we're going to give you the last word.
Yeah, I'm an ex-former South African, of course, interested in the connection to South Africa of Israel Alter, and wondering when was he in Johannesburg, for how long, because obviously they had a strong cantorial tradition in Johannesburg as well. And then when did he come to the United States, and when did he make these recordings? Did he do any of this in South Africa, or did it only happen when he got to the States?
So
Benny can answer that.
I think Benny told us that he left Germany, Nazi Germany, for South Africa, because it was impossible for him to continue in Hanover in the 1930s after Hitler came to power.
Very simple.
Recordings were made in 1925, I think, or 6.
Very simple. Israel Alter left Hanover in 1935 on his way back on a ship from South Africa auditioning, and he heard the Nuremberg laws on the radio on the ship. So he wrote back to South Africa, and he accepted the job that the chief cantor of.
So he turned around on the boat, huh?
And on the boat, and he was in South Africa until 1960, when he was invited by the Hebrew Union College to teach at the Cantorial School, because they chose the best teachers in whatever subject they were teaching. So they had Binder and Genschoff and all the great in their position, but Israel Alter left South Africa in 1960.
All right, great. So David and Alex, if you have any last words, I'm going to let you, actually not going to let Martin have the last word. I'll let you guys have the last word, since you did such a masterful job.
So I think that coming back to the Ukraine and the prayerful intercession, heaven-piercing compositions which we've heard, we hope very much will have some effect up on high. And we all pray for peace in the near future.
And we also would love people to take advantage of the various different charities, and please give from your heart to the people in the Ukraine who need our help, desperately. We didn't realize that today we would have the same troubles as we had many, many years ago. We thought we'd be past it, but please pray hard and dig deep into your pockets and help those in need, because they are in desperate need in the Ukraine to get out and to find somewhere to live in the countries all over Europe. So please do your bit to support this. And it is been very, very difficult for David and I actually to choose what songs or which chazonim to play, because we could have 2 or 3 or 4 programs even. But if, I don't mind saying this for David, but we could do another program if the Cantors Assembly would like it and there is enough need for it, and play completely different chazonim and different music. So thank you for hosting us. Thank you for being part of us. And please be safe and be well. And if we don't see you before, have a good, wonderful Pesach.
Thank you, Alex. And just a quick reminder, what was for people who are on your side of the pond, what was the name of the charity that they can?
World Jewish Relief.
World Jewish Relief. Okay, and for those of us who are in the U.S., if you want to visit the www.cantors.org/Ruach Ukraine, you will find a wide range of charities that are all actively working in Ukraine right now. So thank you again. We all pray for peace, and we all hope that we see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.